Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor as well as mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. Today, we switch gears a little bit and focus on school-age children, which all new moms will have to be thinking about in the next few years anyways. So I wanted to plant some seeds around that. And I had the honor of interviewing Connor Boyack to talk about the topic of whether our schools are failing our children, which is a really strong statement. Connor gives a really good explanation about how we can, as a community, improve education for our children. So Connor Boyack is an author, public speaker, TV show producer, podcaster, and libertarian communicator. He's the founder and president of Liberatis Institute, an award-winning free market think tank and educational organization responsible for changing over 100 laws across a wide range of issues. Their strategy and tenacity has yielded an 85% success rate in seeing their proposals enacted into law, with several landmark policies being the first of their kind in the entire country. Through the Institute, Connor and his team have reformed laws on a wide range of issues, including drug policy, privacy, transparency, property rights, free association, criminal justice, and parental rights. They're now attempting to scale their work across the country to have national impact. And Connor is also the author of the Tuttle Twins book, which is a children's series introducing young readers to economic, political, and civil principles with over 4 million books sold. And he's a native of California and a Brigham Young University grad, now currently residing near Salt Lake City, Utah, with his wife and 2 homeschooled children. Hi, Connor. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is going to be great. This is a good topic. We've covered education. We've covered, learning processes in past episodes. But this is kind of next level about intentionality around the education process for our children. And we really are going to cover a deep question here. Are our schools failing our children? Excuse me. So tell me, what are we? What's the answer here?
I mean, they are. And part of the challenge that we have as parents is realizing that the goalposts have been moving. So not only are the schools failing our children, but the standards to which kids are held today have lowered compared to what we expected of the rising generation decades or a century plus ago. And so it's not enough to say, let's look at test scores, or let's look at graduation rates, or let's look at whatever other statistic you want to point to. You have to understand that the education system in America and beyond has largely been dumbed down, and people are graduating from these institutions, these schools, without really in-depth knowledge, certainly without experience, because they're just sitting at a desk the whole time. But we're pumping kids out of this system, and they're ill-prepared for adulthood. We're seeing that all over the place right now in our society. And I think it really stems from how we're educating and raising our youth. Too many parents just want to outsource to the system. They delegate to, the government, go educate my kids. I'll drop them off for, daycare. Hopefully they learn something along the way. And it's that lack of intentionality, that dereliction of duty, I might even say, for parents, which leads into problems later in life when these kids are ill-prepared for adulthood and becoming contributing members of society.
Well said. I think I just, I'm an older mom. And so I just look back at how my childhood was, and even some of the younger moms coming in my practice, and, or even the younger, let's say 20 somethings, they're not moms yet. And they're like, oh, I'm adulting. And there's this whole thing. I'm like, what do you mean? There was no adulting when I became 18 years old. It was like, this is what you do. And I chose to go off to college. Not everyone, that's not the right fit for everyone. But regardless, I didn't move back home. I wasn't, being supported by my parents. I was off and running after high school graduation. And I was prepared for that, right? And I guess the education school system had something to do with that, but my parents had a big part to do with that, right? So I guess also, as you're talking about education, you're not just referring to schools. you're referring to education at home as well.
Well, I think that's the critical distinction. Any teacher, any principal will tell you that parents make or break the education of their children. To the extent that parents are more informed and involved and aware as it pertains to their child's education, whether you're homeschooling or your kids are going to the public school or whatever, the more the parent is involved, the better off the child is going to be. And so the challenge I think we have in our society is we've conditioned parents to say, oh, dual income, both parents go work, drop your kids off at school, you're all burned out at the end of the day, turn on, Netflix and play a game, and then you're off to bed. And so parents focus more on being the, disciplinarians, the entertainers, the food providers, right? But they pull themselves out of the education realm almost entirely, other than to say, did you get your homework and why are you getting C's in that class? And so by pulling them out, we're losing the natural role I think that parents have to play as the primary individuals to be educating their children. You can get help from whoever. You can hire tutors, you can send them to school, you can do a homeschool co-op, online learning. There's all kinds of options. But my feeling is that if we want our children to become thriving members of society, not just functioning members of society, but thriving individuals, the parents do have a significant role to play when it comes to education. And you're right, schooling does not necessarily imply education. There are plenty of kids who are schooled who are not educated. And there's tons of kids who are highly educated that never went to school. So we can't really combine the two. Yes, education can happen at school, but as we'll talk about, I'm sure in a moment, a lot of what's going on in the schools today is quite counterproductive to lasting and successful education.
Wow. So you wrote the book Mediocrity, and tell me, what is the purpose of this book and what pushed you to write it? Writing books aren't easy. You've written a lot of books. Like, what pushes you to keep writing books?
Well, I know I've seen the power of a book to change someone's life. I went down this education path myself because of a book. This book was written by a teacher, 30-year veteran of the public school system in New York. His name was John Taylor Gatto. And he tried within the system to do the best for his kids. He was the one that would break all the rules and take his kids for a field trip to actually go see something or experience something rather than sit at desks. He was really trying to help his kids, and so he won. And this is in the late '80s. He won an award for New York State Teacher of the Year.
And was he in New York City, or he was in a different area?
He was in New York City, absolutely, in a very poor area, poor school, underprivileged kids.
Right, less resources.
Less resources. So the prior year, he actually won New York City Teacher of the Year. And then the following year, he was awarded New York State Teacher of the Year. In that very same year, he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled, "I Quit, I Think," in which he goes on to say that he was in an institution trying to reform it from within, but that he was harming kids more than he was helping them because he was complicit in a system that was grinding them down and dumbing them down. And despite how much he tried as a teacher, he couldn't make it work. So he quit. He went on to go write books and do a public speaking tour. And one of his books that impacted me is called Dumbing Us Down: The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Education. And so I read that book, and I now am on a totally different trajectory in life, because as a young dad, I think I had one kid at the time, and I showed it to my wife, and I'm like, hey, read this. This is why I struggled in school. He's talking about all these things of the way schools work, and this totally resonates. So for me now as an author and writing a bunch of books, I'm so invested in it because I know the power that it can have when someone's just sitting there quietly pondering, reflecting on what it means for them, working through their challenges. Mediocrity is an interesting one that comes on the anniversary of something that happened 40 years ago. There was a group that got together called the National Commission on Excellence in Education in the United States, and they spent 18 months touring the country, talking to teachers and students, reviewing scores and textbooks and all kinds of things to understand how was the system in America doing to educate our kids. They concluded this report after 18 months by writing a report, what they called an open letter to the American people. It was titled "A Nation at Risk." And they went on to say that there was a rising tide of mediocrity that was threatening America's educational foundations. And that if a foreign government had attempted to impose upon America the very mediocre education performance we now have today, again, back in 1983, we might have viewed it as an act of war, they said. As it stands, we've allowed this to happen to ourselves. So they were trying to draw attention in 83 to the declining performance, the poor output of the government school system. Despite dumping all kinds of money into it and trying all these reforms, things were just declining. They wanted to raise a warning signal. Well, that 40th anniversary was just recently. It was April 26th.
Was this during the Reagan administration?
It was, yes.
It sounds like something that would have come out of there.
It does, right?
And you're right. Now it's 40 years later, and you're saying we're worse off than we were 40 years ago.
That's the main contention of the book, is that we are, if we were mediocre then, we're sub-mediocre now. There are certainly some things that have improved. You can look at a few, what I'll call anomalies of things that have actually improved. But largely speaking, when you look at educational attainment, when you look at test scores, when you look at proficiency, when you look at self-sufficiency and satisfaction and all the rest, we're not doing great at all. And again, like, though this example was for the United States, this is not something that other countries are immune to. What we're seeing across the world, frankly, is that when you have this modern education system that warehouses these kids and makes them sit at a desk for hours a day, reading from uninspired textbooks to regurgitate information to the teacher just because it'll be on the test. It's a flawed model. And frankly, it's artificial. What I mean by that is that's not how you and I learn.
It's not real life.
It's not real life. When your refrigerator breaks, you don't think to yourself, I'm so glad I read the manual 12 years ago when I bought this fridge, just in case I ever needed to deal with something right now. No, just in time for when you need that information, you go watch a YouTube video, you go read the manual, you call an uncle, right? Just in time. That's how we as adults learn. We have a problem at work. We don't know how to fix it. Just in time for when we need the information, we'll go research something on, the internet or whatever. So the school system is artificial in the sense that they're saying to kids, you might need to know 40 years from now that the mitochondrion is the powerhouse of the cell. So we need to make sure that you memorize it today. And so it's an artificial model. I'm not anti-memorization. I'm not saying that we can't, expose kids to a broad foundation of knowledge, but I think we've gone a bit out of balance.
And I want to follow up on that, Connor, because, and this is going to date me, but the internet was not around when I was growing up. So I had to go to the card catalog and I had to go to the library, and it was arduous to do that type of research, right? And obviously it was available, but what we have now with technology blows away the way my existence, the first, even through high school, right? If I wanted to write a paper, it was not internet. It was not Google. I didn't have access to those. Now kids do. And It's going to even shift in the next 5 to 10. The technology is just growing. Massive. So to your point, anything you need to know or learn is at our fingertips now. And so memorization is less valuable to a certain extent than it was even 20, 30, 40 years ago. Maybe minus some, basic stuff, right? So and just even how we interact and work is so much different than it was. So it's almost what I'm hearing too is, can we compare apples to oranges? Like what they were doing 40 years ago and what was available in 1983 is not even they didn't even have it on their radar. So how do we even look at these two things together? I mean, I recognize that things aren't optimal, but we're looking at a totally different world than what was available 40 years ago.
I'm glad you asked this question. Teachers right now, many teachers are terrified by things like ChatGPT and these artificial intelligence.
And there's no reason to be afraid of it, right? We got to embrace it.
Right, exactly.
It's not these kids are going to, plagiarize their papers, right?
Some will, but I think the reason why teachers fear so much is that, like any monopolist, anyone who has not had competition in a long time, they become very set in their ways, very accustomed to the way things are, and they don't want disruption to perfect little ecosystem that has existed. And technology, you are right, is going to massively disrupt how we educate kids. Why do kids need to memorize things if they can pull out their phone, ask a question, and get data-rich, super helpful, immersive knowledge at their fingertips?
At their fingertips, you point out. Yeah.
And so for me, the question is this. Speaking to all the moms listening to your podcast, right? As you think about your own children, do you want them trained and prepared for an economy from a century ago or for today's and the future's economy? The schools today, the government schools, the public schools, for decades, they were actually called factory schools. That was the widespread nickname that we used. Why? Because they were widely and correctly perceived at preparing kids for good factory blue collar type jobs. That was the economy of the time, very industrial economy. Hey, we need kids, we need adults, graduates of school who can follow orders, who can focus on just their piece in a broader puzzle, who, will only go to the bathroom when they get permission or won't cause disruptions. They're part of a collective rather than, focusing on their individuality. And so the school system was built and architected in a way to support the economy at the time. The economy has radically changed and is about to change even more radically with AI. And yet the schools are stuck in the past. They are still factory schools. And so I'm not here to say to all the moms listening, you must pull your kids out and homeschool them because it's the only way. Intentionality matters, and you can make the best of any circumstance. But I think we have to challenge the status quo and say, if I enroll my kids in this school or that school or this option, is this going to best prepare them to become thriving members of society in a changing world and economy today and in the future? I think that then that question filters down the viable options if that is indeed the outcome that you want for your children. It is what I want for mine, and I suppose many of your listeners do as well.
That's what we all want. Yeah, we want what's best. And that can be a big question to ask, but it's a really important one. And it goes back to all these big questions we ask around what test do I want to get during my pregnancy? Where do I want to give birth? Who is delivering my baby or who's catching my baby? All of the things that women, especially as a primary caretaker of their children, typically are asking these questions. And, sometimes it's interesting. They'll be like, what's the best stroller and what's all, and all that. And then we don't really question what's the best school for our child. It's just like, this is where I live. And maybe I don't have the funds for private school, right? So my child's just going to go to the school that is paid for by my taxes, right? Until they're in that school and they're failing. And I do see that too. Sometimes we don't know until the kid's in it. And I hear this from moms. It's like, wow, my child is not thriving in this school. And they are then becoming interested. And so I would also ask for especially moms, like even myself, my son's starting kindergarten in the fall. How do you even know before your child's in that school environment if it's a good fit for that child, that individual?
That's a great question. I think a lot of us as parents, especially the moms, have a bit of FOMO on behalf of our kids, right? Fear of missing out. It's like, oh, if I don't enroll them in this program, or if I don't get them set up for this, or if they're not part of that, then
all the activities, right?
Yeah, they're going to be deprived. They're not going to be as good as they're. And I think we have to recognize kids are resilient and we're going to fail and we're going to enroll them in a school that doesn't work and we need to pivot. I think what's important is just adaptability, right? To say, okay, we tried this outcome, we tried this school or whatever, it didn't work. Let's not be so committed to one certain path that we can't then move along the way. We, for example, in my case, we homeschooled our kids for 10 years, just put them in a private school for the past year.
All of your kids?
School. I have two. Yeah. So we enrolled both kids in a micro school. Next year, we're taking one of the kids out back to do a kind of a homeschool blend. We're keeping one in micro school. And for me as a dad, I know my wife is the same. A lot of it is just open conversation with the teachers, open conversation with our kids, as much as you can do age appropriate. Hey, what do you like about this? Hey, what are you struggling with this?
Mm-hmm. Are they happy? Right? You can know that from a 5-year-old. Are they, like their emotional state speaks volumes.
And I want to say this as a homeschool dad. I'll put in a brief plug for homeschooling, especially because we're talking to the moms here. I speak at a lot of conferences, homeschool education type conferences. And so I'm mostly talking to the moms because moms are the ones
usually, right?
To that load.
Yeah.
And what I have seen over the past 8 or 9 years is a high rate of burnout. Moms, especially, again, just speaking from my experience, what I've seen is too many moms feel like to educate their children, whether they homeschool or they send their kids to school, but they know they got to help with homework and they got to do all the other educational stuff that the schools are, not doing at all. So many moms feel inadequate. They think, oh, I wasn't good at biology in school. How am I supposed to teach my kids science? Or
I'm not a teacher, right? I didn't get an education degree.
I'm not professional, or I was never good at math. I don't know how to help my kid with his algebra, right? And so the moms especially feel like they need to be knowers of all the things, right? I need to be the science expert and the English lit expert and the American history expert.
It's a lot of pressure.
Well, I think it's very different. It's what you just said a moment ago with strollers and birth options and everything else. Every mom is a good Googler. Like, especially in your audience with the people who are like highly
they want to know
research.
Their options. Yes.
They are so good at research. You can do that same thing when it comes to the education of your children. You can do that, have that same level of intentionality. Or if you decide to even homeschool your kid as an example, right? You don't need to be a subject matter expert or a professional teacher. You just need to be good at Googling. Your kid is curious about how rockets are made. Hey, let's watch some YouTube videos. Let's take this online course on outschool.com, or let's find a little tutor from, India who builds rockets, who could for $15, chat with us for a couple. I mean, there's so many options and there's an abundance of information. And so for me, it's a confidence game for the moms to realize, let's give you permission to not be subject matter experts.
Which is unrealistic. Nobody is. Even teachers don't know every subject. I'm really glad you're pointing that out, because that is overwhelming. And then at the end of the day, it is, it hurts, like that self-esteem, like I'm failing my child. I'm not good enough. All the things that can get surfaced from that. And I think what you're also saying is you can learn together with your child. And that could be a beautiful bonding experience that the parent has with their child. And then maybe your child becomes more of an expert in that topic and they teach you.
Laura, it's what you said. I cannot overemphasize enough, but I'm going to try. Not only is it a bonding moment for mom and son or daughter to learn together, or dad, right? For parents and kids, not only is that a bonding moment, I think it is superior for this reason. If our children are trained to come to their teacher or come to us as parents because they have a question and they need an answer, that's a very authoritarian model of teaching. Oh, I know everything, and so you need to just trust me because I told you I think that's not how we as adults learn. How much better it is when your kid comes to you and says, hey, mom, how are rockets built? Rather than offering up an answer like you know what you're talking about or doing your best, what if your kid could say, that's a great question. How would we find out how rockets are built? Hey, let's go to Google, let's go to YouTube, let's go to the library. And your kids, not only is it the bonding moment, but it's behavioral pattern development. They're seeing, when mom or dad is curious about something and they don't know, here's how they're finding out the answers. I can do that too.
This is life skills.
Right.
We have to. And, I want to give an example about that in the healthcare model, because with traditional allopathic medicine, people were conditioned, if you have a health challenge, you go to your medical doctor and they will always know the answer because it's your body, it's your health. They're the authority, they're the expert on your body, and they have the answer. And that's been a cultural conditioning for many decades. And the internet has certainly shifted that, because now we have Dr. Google. But it goes back to nobody has all of the answers, even if you're an expert in that topic. And, sadly, I hear a lot of my patients do see their MD and the doctor doesn't just say, I don't know, or let me get back to you. Let me do some research. Yeah. There's no shame in that, right? They will just dismiss And just that is the worst thing you can do to somebody, is just dismiss what they're presenting you with, because you're really just saying, it's not relevant, it's not important, whatever. Instead of saying, I don't know the answer, let me refer you somewhere else. But how often has that been happening over the past several decades in healthcare, right? And now that people are entering with some information from Dr. Google, at least there can be more of a dialogue there. But I do think the same thing with parent-child relationships. We don't have to know everything. Nobody does know everything. And it's better to just say, I don't know, than to try to bullshit it. Right?
Yeah. No, I agree. And again, we all know that we shouldn't be teaching kids what to think. We should be teaching them how to think. It's just that the school system especially is built in such a way that kids are just told what to think all day.
Yeah.
Here's
I
all
do
the
feel
stuff
like that's what schools think they are supposed to do. This is what you need to think.
We want them to aspire to that greater level of education. We need to be creating, critical thinkers and kids who are intellectually curious. But as we look at the outcomes, that's simply not what's happening. There are surely those like John Taylor Gatto, the New York teacher I mentioned, who are trying from within. There are amazing teachers who sign up in the system, but a lot of times the system chews them up and spits them out because it just becomes this very kind of bureaucratic, teach to the bottom, race to the bottom type of approach. And I think there's a better way. So that's kind of why we did the mediocrity book, to try and be kind of a warning signal for parents to say, hey, let's understand the problem so that we can then talk about the solutions.
So I know your book focuses on public schools in the United States. How is that different from charter schools, private schools, and not even just homeschooling, right? Like where you send your child to a school, but it's a different type of school. You mentioned a micro school.
Yeah.
What is that? What is this? How's that all compare to in the mediocrity book level?
So in our book, we focus on government schools, which are both public and charter. Charter schools are government schools. They just offer a little bit more flexibility for curriculum or pedagogy or things like that. So, but all in, at the end of the day, they're teaching the same content, the same curriculum standards, and they're seeing a lot of the same outcomes, frankly. So the book does encompass both public and charter schools.
Got it.
It's interesting asking about private schools because there is more certainly freedom there for parents who can afford it or choose to go down that path.
Right.
And yet the challenge that we see, we only touched on this lightly in the book. The challenge that we see is that in the data is that private schools often are not superior to their public school counterparts when it comes to academic proficiency, in large measure because so often they're teaching in the same kind of way. They're private, so here we wear uniforms and here we do things a little bit differently and we have better teachers because we pay them more. Great.
More resources, right?
More resources, but they're using the same textbooks a lot of times, right? They're teaching in an authoritarian way. They got the kids all sitting at desks. It's just 80% like the public schools. It's just you're paying way more to go here and maybe the quality is a little bit better in different ways. So we don't really see in the private schools, the large private schools, like a huge change. Where you do see it is in the micro schools. So
what is that?
So a micro school is what we used to call a pandemic pod. That was the temporary name during COVID given to, typically what would happen is a teacher would say, you know what, to hell with this. I don't want to teach anymore. I love teaching, but I hate the system. So I'm going to go start my own little micro school and I'll gather 10 kids together from the neighborhood. We'll teach in my basement or rent a place or whatever. And I can charge a modest amount, maybe a couple $1,000s per kid or something, not like a $20,000 private school tuition. So I'll charge a little bit and I can get enough kids where I can make the same amount of money, but I can be my own boss and I can teach, 2/3 of the time. Cause let's be honest, homeschooling kids get done in 2 hours, what public school kids take, 6 to 8 hours to do. So you don't need a ton of time to proficiently educate kids. So these micro schools are this post-pandemic explosion of education entrepreneurship, where you have these individuals opening up. They're basically micro private schools.
They don't need a license for it or anything.
Typically, no. Yeah, no. It's another big innovation in the past 5-10 years is homeschool co-ops. So traditionally, homeschool would be in your home, you're schooling your kids, and that's where mom's insecurities come in. And I don't know how to teach my kids science and all the things. So there's curriculum galore designed to help, homeschool parents. But homeschool co-ops are superior because we were part of a co-op for 8 years. In our case, how it worked was there were about 30 families. We all pitched in a nominal amount to cover the lease of a church that we leased a couple days a week. The parents would teach classes. So, for example, I taught a class on public speaking. I taught a class on history. I taught a class on writing. There was a mom who was a biology major. She taught a science class. There was a mom who's an artist. She taught an art class. So people are able to speak to their strengths rather than their weaknesses.
Yes.
You pool those resources. It keeps the cost low because, if I'm teaching other people's kids, I don't want to charge them money because then they're going to charge money, for my kids. So it suppresses the costs. It brings families together. The kids get a good social outlet. The moms get a good social kind of bonding network. So homeschool co-ops are actually a great way for parents who want a lot of autonomy and intentionality with their kids, but don't want to go it alone. And they want a support structure. So the homeschool co-ops and the micro schools are kind of newer innovations that are all over the place.
And the micro school is only been since 2020. Is this literally something that came out of the pandemic? Do they exist before?
They've existed before. We just called them private schools, and we just didn't have the same volume of them. During the pandemic, you did have these pandemic pods, these little families of 6 kids or 10 kids all gathering together, and so micro schools has become kind of a name and a thing post pandemic. Yes, it existed, but it just was small and not really well known.
It's more popular now.
Before COVID, it's very popular now. Yeah.
So that's one of the blessings that came out of the pandemic.
One of the silver linings. There were a few.
There were a few, for sure.
Only a few.
I would say people's awareness about their health was another silver lining that came out of the pandemic, is making health a priority. And to me, that's really so important. I
agree with that. The other silver lining, going back to your point earlier, that experts don't even know everything. I think one of the other silver linings with COVID is that we've destroyed the word expert, because we were told for 2 or 3 years, experts say this, experts say that, and it changed every day. And so I think, I'm a big science nut. I love science, but I hate the politicization, however you say that, of science, and being told by an expert what's true when that's not in fact actually true, as it turns out.
Especially when there was like an agenda behind it, right?
For sure. And so to me, I like the critical thinking. I like the pursuit of truth. I like reading. I like learning. And so that's another silver lining to me, is like, we can be a bit more skeptical right now, I think, of authority, to say, just because you're saying that, I don't mean it's true.
That's a big silver lining, is really like kind of that mindless, the media told me this and the experts told me this.
Right.
And I feel like enough people have woken up in the past 3 years to say, wow, this was a bunch of bullshit. I'm using that word again. I never say the word bullshit, Connor, on this podcast, but it was a lot of BS. And then it's like, whoa, what other BS have I been getting fed? And that goes back to critical thinking.
Yep.
Right.
Which, interestingly, I will say, Laura, there was a survey a couple months ago. I think it was done just in the United States, but it was a massive survey of like 50,000 parents or something, to get it to be very statistically significant. And among all the many questions that they asked parents, they asked them to rank their priority of all the different reasons why we send kids to school. Right. To be ready for a career, to be ready for college, to learn about, all the reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Top 2 reasons why parents said that they want their kids to have a good K-12 education. Number 1 was practical skills. Practical skills. Number 2 was critical thinking. And so what's amazing about that is that I think it's a fair assessment to say that the school system, broadly speaking, does very poor at those two things. They're not really teaching practical skills. They're not teaching kids, financial management, or how
Right.
to change the oil on a car,
Right. How to cook a healthy meal.
or how to cook a healthy meal, right? And they're not teaching critical thinking. So again, my pitch to parents is like, if you want something more for your kids, if you aspire for them to thrive and to rise above the mediocrity in our society, you got to do something different. I don't know what that means for you. There's tons of solutions out there. I'm not going to sell any particular one. But I think there's that definition of insanity, right? Which is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results.
That's right.
And so if we just keep sending our kids to these schools and just assume they'll be okay. Oh, I went to school. I turned out fine. Right. Things have changed in the past several decades, and I think they're going to keep changing, and not for the better. So for the parents who are researching the best stroller and researching the best, person to catch their baby and all the rest, let's also research the best thing educationally for our kids. Maybe we're going to have to make some sacrifices. Maybe we're going to have to reshuffle family priorities.
Right.
But again, if we want that investment in our kids and for them to have a thriving potential in the future, I think we got to not put them in circumstances where they're going to wallow in mediocrity.
Yeah. Well said. I want to ask you about, I have a question here. Why has the number of homeschooling families tripled across the country? I don't know what the timeline is on that. How much of an increase have we seen over what period of time?
So that's pre and post COVID.
Okay. So 3 years.
Obviously for a period of 2 or 3 weeks, everyone was a homeschooler.
Correct. In New Jersey, New York, it was a lot longer than that.
True. Yeah. Depending on where you lived, you were homeschooling for longer. Mm-hmm. I remember right after the schools shut down, my wife did a little, I don't know what you'd call it, cottage meeting in our backyard for all the neighborhood moms, because everyone knows my wife is a big homeschooler. And so she was like, okay, here's how you do it, or here's how we do it at least, and trying to give them some pointers. So yeah, homeschooling spiked, obviously, after the schools all reopened. Homeschooling was about triple. It's settled now to be about double or 2.5x of what it was pre-COVID. I think what happened is a lot of parents saw their kids on Zoom school and they were seeing what was happening. They're like, oh, why are my kids?
And I will say, Zoom school is not homeschooling, and people were putting it together because their child was at home. But this, that is not homeschooling.
Yeah, it's not. Well, and I even don't like the term homeschooling, because I don't want to school kids within the four walls of my home. Just like private school earlier, right? Just because you're in a private school, if they're doing things so similar to all the problems in the government school, is it any better? Is it better when you replicate it at your home? Well, okay, maybe they're not being bullied at school, or so maybe there's some advantages. To me, the true potential of so-called homeschool or home-centered learning is really speaking to the individuality of the child. So rather than saying, hey, kid, you must learn all these things that all other eighth graders have to learn at the same age because someone decided that every eighth grader needs to know all these things. So rather than forcing my kid to fit someone else's mold, I, as a homeschool dad, I want to figure out how I can mold an education curriculum around my child's individual path. We all know as parents, when you have more than one kid, you quickly learn that your children are super unique. You got to discipline them differently. You got to feed them differently. You got to parent them differently. And I think we have to educate them differently, right? And so for me, it's like if my kid is, I'll be very specific. My boy is 14 next week, super interested in Pokemon. Okay. The true vision of home-centered learning from my perspective is to let him go deep in his interests, his passions, and then build around that as much educational material as I can. So, hey, I want you to go write me a 2-page essay about which Pokemon is best and why, right? If I make him write about the Articles of Confederation, he's going to shoot himself, right? It's super boring.
Super boring.
But if I let him write about his interests, he loves it. Or if I say, hey, I want you to write a business plan for selling Pokemon cards at the farmer's market. wow, I can make money selling Pokemon, And so now he's attracted to business because it's all centered around Pokemon. And I could go on. You could do art and science and all the rest.
Yeah.
And so what's amazing about this opportunity is that our children are naturally curious about the things that they're passionate about.
Right.
And you know this as a parent, I'm sure. We all do. When we talk to our kids about their interests, they gobble it up. Like, oh my gosh, dad's talking to me about Pokemon. He never talks to me about Pokemon. Like, let's talk about Pokemon. And so if we can use their interests, so I wrote a book on this called Passion Driven Education, which gets into all the weeds on how to do this. But if we can use our children's interests as a way to honor their individuality and say, okay, hey, you really care about this. You're really interested in this. Let me support you in that journey and use it as an opportunity to teach you all kinds of broader things that you're going to love learning, not because I'm sitting you down and saying, well, let me teach you how spreadsheets work today. Right. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, Keaton, let's get all of your Pokemon cards and let's catalog them. I'm going to show you in the spreadsheet how we can categorize them. We can then build a chart. Yep. And because it all has the context for what he's curious about, he's lapping it up and loving learning because it's all for the ends that he desires, rather than me imposing on him those ends and saying, you must learn spreadsheets. You must learn how charts work. I'm using something that he already loves as the hook. And so to me, that's the true potential of home-centered learning, is to have that level of adaptability and intentionality where we can bend the education curriculum to our children's uniqueness rather than suppress our children's uniqueness so that they can bend and adapt and mold to someone else's curriculum standard.
That makes a lot of sense. I know some critics on homeschooling and this would not apply to the co-op, are like this, how do your kids get social and all of the life skills that are required with interacting with peers, right? If you're only around siblings and mom and dad all the time.
Yeah, that was the homeschooling of the 1980s. That's not whether you are in a co-op or not. The internet and social media and meetup groups and field trips, and there's an abundance. No matter where you live, there's an abundance of opportunities for homeschoolers to meet up for a park day. Hey, let's all go play today. Let's
go to the museum
today. Yeah, absolutely. And I actually like flipping that question. I say, okay, Mr. Public Schooler who criticizes homeschoolers, let's talk about what type of socialization kids are getting in public schools with bullying and drugs and sexting and all kinds of garbage happening in the schools. Is that the type of socialization you want for your kids?
No.
So maybe there's some trade-offs that we should discuss, and that, it's not like yours is a utopia and mine's a dystopia, right? There's trade-offs, but I would rather have a wholesome environment. I was bullied. I went to public school in San Diego. I was bullied a lot. I was a late bloomer, so I was very tiny as a high schooler in the freshman, sophomore. I was stuffed in trash cans. I was shoved. I was called all kinds of names. My kids have never been bullied. Like, it doesn't exist in homeschool co-ops.
Wow.
It's just the parents are there. It's just a different environment. So to me, there's far superior socialization today in these homeschooling environments than there ever has been in the government schools.
That's an interesting point. So then we talk about a child who's never been bullied, which is a beautiful thing. And now they get their first job and they have a bully boss, let's say, or a bully coworker, right? Because bullies do exist outside of school, right? Sure. My assumption would be, is their self-esteem and confidence are at a level where they're like, I'm not putting up with this. And, they don't tolerate it because they've never had to tolerate it. So why would they now as an adult?
Absolutely. It's not like we live on a compound 100 miles away from any other human. Our kids know what bullying is. They have friends who are being bullied.
They've been around jerks before.
They've been around jerks. There's kids at church who are picking on them. I share my stories they see in movies, they read in books, so they understand how it works. They understand how to stand up for yourself. But you are right. Giving them some space to develop themselves and their self-esteem and confidence means that later in life, when they have those challenges, I think they're far better prepared for it.
Yeah. So it's recognizing that challenges will continue to exist as we grow, but how we manage those challenges, that is what adulting is, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing, to be able to raise a child who knows how to stand up for themselves, knows how to stand up for the person next to them being bullied. And these are things that we want to raise our children with, these morals and ethics, and self-esteem and self-love, right? Of like, this is why I'm worthy of more than what I'm receiving here. And this is not acceptable. And knowing how to speak their truth.
Yeah, I think it's important that we protect our kids' confidence. It's a crazy world, and to me, I mean, we've said it several times. To me, the theme here is intentionality. Let's not just surrender our kids to the culture and to others and say, bully them all you want so they'll be toughened up, or you're the experts. You have a teaching degree. You must know better than me, right? Like, I think we can do better. And I think there's so many resources now to empower, especially the moms, but parents in general, to be more intentional with their kids. It's a brave new world, both with technology broadly, with AI, with homeschool co-ops, post-COVID, all kinds of changes. I'm actually very hopeful and optimistic when it comes to education, because there's so many options today that give parents alternatives to consider. The whole point we wrote Mediocrity was to say, you got to understand how bad the problems are, even more so than 2-3 decades ago when you went to school. Check this out.
Yeah.
And then now that you understand the problems, you need to go find some solutions, whatever that means for you. Again, it could mean still going to public school, but doing it in a different way and being involved in, and volunteering in the classroom and all the rest.
Right.
It really just boils down to parental involvement and intentionality.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I also want to share with our audience about your Tuttle Twins series that you wrote. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Tuttle Twins is a series of children's books that teach the ideas of a free society. So they're fully illustrated. And in fact, I think I got some here for the folks who are watching on video. So these are fully illustrated books. They're each about 60 pages long. The main books are for kids ages roughly 5 to 10. They teach things like how money works, personal responsibility, entrepreneurship, education. We got all kinds of topics. We've got books for toddlers. So we have like the ABCs of economics, the ABCs of liberty. We've got the 1, 2, 3s of innovation. Right. So they open it up and 4 is for the 4 corners of the earth, so many distant lands, but the internet puts that world in our pocket, accessible on demand. So anyways, so we got books for toddlers, for teens. We've sold over 5 million copies. We actually now have a cartoon series as well that folks can watch. Basically, we're trying to empower parents, whether you homeschool or not, to help kids understand how the world works. They're not being taught this stuff in schools. They're not learning about, civics that well. In fact, data just came out recently, 2 weeks ago, showing that only 13% of 8th graders are proficient in history in schools in the United States. To me, that's appalling. Only 13% are proficient. You've probably seen those videos like Man on the Street, where it's like, hey, what country did the United States fight in the Revolutionary War? And people are guessing like Canada and Mexico.
Wow.
And, because they just don't know history that well. So our books, the Tuttle Twins, are designed to say, look, the schools aren't doing that well teaching. They're not talking about entrepreneurship. They're not talking about, personal responsibility.
The finances, that's a big one. Right. That's been on other episodes. Exactly. Like they have no idea what bank accounts and savings. I mean, my personal experience, I went off to college and I had worked in high school, but I didn't know how to save money. And I was like, oh, credit card, this is awesome, right? And then I got into debt and it was a hard lesson. That was a hard knock lesson to learn. And it was unnecessary, I think, if I had a better understanding of how money works and investments and how exciting it is for your money to make money.
Absolutely. Compound interest. I mean, imagine if we taught 12-year-olds the power of compound interest and even help them starting to save every month some allowance or whatever. Right. Like it'd be a game changer. It'd be
game
huge.
changer.
So for us, Tuttle Twins is that resource to help parents talk to their kids about these ideas. And all those books are all at TuttleTwins.com.
Awesome. Well, Connor, this has been an enlightening conversation. I think a very important one, even for our mamas who just gave birth and their kids are a few years out. This is really important to plant a seed about that intentionality regarding your child's education. And what are your last thoughts that you'd like to share?
My last thoughts is I think we underestimate ourselves as parents and how much we can do if we try. We feel overwhelmed by our inadequacies and our insecurities and all the rest. And again, from all the conversations with parents, especially moms I've had, I feel very confident in saying we can do better than we think we can. And we're doing better than we think we are. And so let's not use those insecurities as an excuse to shirk our duties or to neglect our responsibilities. I think we have to assume our parental responsibilities, including when it comes to education. And whether you solicit help from enrolling them in a school or hiring a tutor or homeschool co-op or whatever else, it's still our responsibility. We need to be intentional. We need to be supporting our kids individually, uniquely, as best as we can. And there's never been an easier time to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Laura.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Connor gave quite a great argument regarding how, as parents, we have the power to remove mediocrity from our society and culture through the upbringing and education of the next generation, our children, and how there's different opportunities for education. And when we have open minds, we can really understand what type of schooling works best for our individual child and how to make sure they get the education and learning that they deserve and need, and really prepare them for successful adulthood, which is what we're all looking for our children. So if you want to find more about his organization, Libertas Institute, and also about the Tuttle Twins children's books that he's written, you can go to the website libertas.org, LIBERTAS.org.